So, welcome back, hip hop travelers. We're here with a true legend of British record production, international record production, somebody who has a lot to say about sampling and making records. Glenn Skinner, everybody.
Hey Mike, how you doing?
Welcome on board. Thank you for being on Hip Hop Time Machine.
You're very welcome indeed. Do I get to fly in a helicopter as well?
Yeah, maybe we can organize that.
Sure.
So I said that on camera, so now we need to organize. And what location would you like? Because we're down New York now.
Straight to Vegas, I think.
Vegas. Cool. So, Glenn, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, I know some of your work. I love your work.
Okay. Well, I started like most other people did as an artist, playing in bands, and found that most of the people that were recording those bands didn't really know what they were doing. I've ended up behind desks and setting up mics to try and get the sounds that I thought we needed, or that the band thought we needed, and that's led to me working first initially doing live sound at a number of clubs in London, and then working in small, in those days there were 4-track and 8-track studios and 16-track, which eventually led to me working at Abbey Road as a T-boy, sandwich maker, get the dry cleaning, park the car guy.
So real analog
yes.
techniques.
Yeah. My main career as an engineer started after EMI moved me on from Abbey Road to a studio called KPM, which was in Denmark Street, which is the heart of London's recording studio land. They used to call it Tin Pan Alley.
Yeah.
Where all the publishers were based, and EMI Music was based there, and KPM was their recording studio for EMI Music. And the great thing about that was, this was in the days before no one had any kind of recording equipment at home. So if anyone wanted to do a demo, they had to come in and record it. And so and as it was a demo studio, there was no producer. So effectively, it was me and the artist. So I would be working with Adam and the Ants one day, Simple Minds the next day, Paul Weller the day after that. And I was only ever recording their demos. I wasn't recording their masters, but I was working with really excellent musicians. And one of the important things for young engineers to understand is the difference between working with really good people and people that aren't so good. When you start off working at small studios where the budget is small, it tends to be the people who aren't as able. When you work with someone like, for example, there's a drummer in Simple Minds was a guy called Mel Gaynor, who was a brilliant drummer. And once you learn how to micing a really good drummer, it makes a completely world of difference to how you would set up a set of mics. And you learn to not bother with EQ, not to bother with too much compression, just get the right mics in the right place, because the drummer does all the work for you and it sounds fantastic.
I heard this quote that, record with intent, even if you get it wrong, and go for a good source.
Exactly. There's like about 5 things that come into play when you're recording drums. One is the drummer, second is the drums that he's using, third is the room, fourth is the song that you're playing, and fifth, and I put it in that place, is the recording engineer.
I totally agree.
All those other 4 things have much more effect on how the drums sound than what the recording engineers. So there's a tendency for people to believe you have to like compress EQ and squash and set up multi mics to get a good drum sound. You don't. You have to have a good drummer with a good drum kit in a nice room playing on a good song. Then you'll get a good drum sound. And
I suppose this brings us to the big topic on Hip Hop Time Machine, which is sampling, and even what I'm trying to do with this, which is recreation of vibes that would have happened in a real studio with real people, with real rooms, because it's not necessarily just about the musical bit of the sampling that we do, but it's also about the sonic material in what we sample. That's kind of part of my quest. I mean, you've been sampled. Have you sampled? Do you sample? How do you feel about sampling? Do you think it's cheating? Do you think it's creating music? Do you think it has a part in rock and roll history?
I think there are a lot of different ways that you can interpret sampling. I don't really think cheating is ever the right thing to say, but I think cheap is a better word. When someone's just sampled a whole track, say a Steely Dan tune or something like that, and they just rap over the top of it, to me, unless the lyrics particularly pertain to the Steely Dan track that they're sampling, or they're doing something with it in filtering or something like that, it's too easy for me. It just seems that it's too easy. But if someone samples an electric it's a piano part from a Steely Dan track, and then makes a beat underneath that, that's completely fine. And I've got no problems with that at all.
So you like to hear a bit of skill in the construction over the sample. I mean, one sort of argument that comes over sampling quite often is that at the time of Public Enemy, when they were making collage type records, and like the Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique and so forth, before the legislation kicked in, people were actually creative with sampling because it was about micro sampling and creating crazy collages of sounds. And then when the legislation kicked in after that Bismarck Key case and various other ones, it actually meant that, well, we can't clear 300 samples. We need to clear maybe only one. Therefore, you get the sort of hip-hop that's more about, here's a 4-bar loop, a drum, production and a vocal.
I mean, that particularly pertained to De La Soul.
You've been sampled by De La Soul?
Well, so the story is that I was sampled by De La Soul. That's actually not accurate. De La Soul covered a song that I wrote. I wrote and produced a song with a band called Curiosity called Name a Number, which was a pretty decent sized hit, sort of top 10-ish in the UK, and didn't really happen in America. So I guess that made it okay for De La Soul to use it because it hadn't been a big hit. And the chorus was, "Hey, how you doing? Sorry, I can't get through." So they
quite famous, man.
So they did their own song, and they used that as a chorus, but they didn't use anything from the Curiosity record at all. They just re-sung it. So it's effectively a cover. And when we heard that De La Soul were going to do it, we were very excited. But it was about 2 more years until it happened, and well, no, maybe not as long as that, but definitely a year. And the reason was they were meticulous in getting clearance for every single sample that they used because they used a lot. And this was on their second album, because 3 Foot High and Rising, the first album, they'd made no money from because they'd used lots of samples and they'd basically got taken to the. I can't say taken to the cleaners because they used other people's material.
But there was a lot to pay for and to cover.
They made no money from that record whatsoever, and it was a big hit, a massive hit. And so obviously they decided that if they want to make any money, they're going to get cleared samples and do deals with people, because obviously, I mean, back in those days, if you used a sample and didn't get a clearance, you would end up having to pay 100%.
Like the song actually belongs to the people you sampled.
Whereas if you got clearance, you would probably get 50%.
Or argue about what percentage is correct, depending on the size of the artist you sample.
Depending on the size,
and who you are as well.
So if you sample somebody pretty big, that would be
the argument.
It would be 100%, Whereas if you sample someone not so hot, like you sample Curiosity, who were a successful pop band at the time, but were not a mega. We did I shouldn't say what the deal was, but it was an equitable deal. However, that song goes on. This song, because then it was someone else about 8 years ago. Forgive me because I've forgotten the name of the act. Did a song called "Ain't Leaving Without You." I forgot the name of the act. It's now an American R&B act. It was really good, and they used it as well. So, but then they used a bit of the De La Soul one and the Curiosity one. So the Curiosity one was written by me and 4 guys from the band. So it's 5 ways. Then the De La Soul had the 3 guys from De La Soul and I think someone else on it. So we're up to about 9.
It's actually quite a few writers adding up.
Then this "Ain't Leaving Without You" had another 4 or 5 people on it. And then post that, Little Mix currently used it about a year ago.
Amazing.
And Shaznay Lewis, who was a producer for them, is on it, plus the 3 girls from Little Mix. And somebody else who I forgot. Sorry, whoever you are. Well, actually, I'll tell you. So the original split was 50-50, Curiosity 50, De La Soul 50. But by the time it's got down, it's just like a smaller and smaller pieces of cheese. I think for the Little Mix thing, I think we're on collectively Curiosity are on about 12 or 14%. So I'm on about 1.5%. It's like it's a sort of famous.
There's more people getting involved.
Famous Marx Brothers sketch where they kind of keep dividing up things when they end up with this. It feels like a Marx Brothers sketch. There comes a point when you're like, you can't actually divide this song up any smaller and it be meaningful. But anyone else still wants to do it, I'm very happy for them to do it.
But it still shows, how far a song can go, and that's quite central to the quest about the sample, because there are many reasons to sample. I suppose there are reasons to sample because of the music that it carries, and I think this is one of those examples. People actually like the hook, and in some cases that they redo it because they don't want to have to clear the mechanical copyright as well as the publishing. In other cases, they actually want to cover it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is there are two main things of sampling. One is because of the sonics, because the sound of it makes your track what it is, and the other thing is because of the content, which is more as to do with the hit type potential of the song and the kind of the familiarity of it and the recognisability of it. And sampling can be a bit like that as well, whereby you give someone a piece of something like a bit of a Michael Jackson song, or the Jackson 5. Sigala just did that for his first song, so he did ABC, and I'm not sure if he sampled it or he redid it.
He was very good at that.
It's sped up, so you can't quite
always tell the sonic.
Yeah, it sounds like MJ singing, but I'm not 100% certain. It probably is. But it introduced him to an audience because everybody knows ABC by Jackson 5. So and now he's had a subsequent single, and he's probably going to have more. And good luck to him.
Sigala, even as a student, was fantastic at getting sounds from vintage records.
Yes,
he had
that mindset anyway. The one thing I kind of like is where you use your record collection as a set of presets, rather than necessarily going to something on a virtual instrument that's like says, pad or Native American low drum with flute, one of those kind of multi-sound things. You go and get a bit off of a Simon & Garfunkel record from 1969, where they're using those blokes from down South America, and sample that, and it gives you the same kind of sets you off in the right direction, gives your song the kind of sonic signature that you're looking for, but it's a different kind of thing. It has a kind of authenticity about it that sometimes just using a keyboard preset doesn't have,
Or even a sample library.
Yeah. I mean, sample libraries are...
What's wrong with them? Is there something wrong with them?
It's down to that ease of use thing. When something is so simple to use, you can guarantee that it's going to be rinsed. Again, it can all be about usage. It can all be about usage. I was mentioning to you earlier before we started about one of my first experiences with sampling was prior to using an S900 and sampling tracks, was sampling the snare drum from Let's Dance by David Bowie, which everybody did.
Absolutely.
It's around about, for anyone who wants to know, it's around about 1 minute 50 in the song. It goes da-ba-da-ba-da. It's snares pretty. It's just about
quite isolated.
It's clear, yeah. And so in those days, before there were samplers, but they were very expensive. It was things like Fairlights and stuff like that. You used a box called an AMS, which was a classic bit of studio kit, which was developed for one thing but got used for something else. So I always liked that. And it had a hold switch, so you could put something into it, flick the hold switch, and then it would just go that sort of play it back. It's kept about 1 second worth of sound in its digital memory, and then you could then put another input into it and use the input to trigger what was in the memory. So you put a real snare that your drummer played, and it was triggering David Bowie's snare because you put that into it. But you had to get it just right because there was no editing of it in the AMS. You had to actually...
You had to be
correctly. You had to switch right, and otherwise, you missed the front end of it or something like that. And it only held 1.5 seconds, so you couldn't, But you get quite good at doing that quite quickly. It's funny.
And you said it's often the sampling is often about not just the music. You said it's also about the sound. What elements of a sound captured maybe in a different era or in a different style or in a different place in the world do you think is what makes those things attractive to samplists or people who look for the samples?
Well, so there'll be stuff like, so for example, Motown. If you listen to the stuff that happened in that room, massive signature to just the room. Okay, Benny Benjamin was the main drummer for Motown, but there are lots of other drummers as well. But it all kind of has the same sort of feel to it. So if you want to capture that kind of the sound of young America, as Motown used to call itself, for early 60s black American music, you're going to go for that, and it's going to give you that straight away.
And is it the playing? Is it the space? What is it? What parameters do you think? What elements make
yes,
that
it's
up?
the playing. Yes, it's the space. Yes, it's the kind of cultural, if I can use the word, the moment. If you know what I mean, the bit where you get those specific people in that specific room at that specific time through that specific gear, through those valves and through those mics, that creates this signature sound, this sonic that is so attractive. Because you respond to it. It evokes an immediate emotional reaction. You hear from the beginning of the Tracks of My Tears, and you immediately feel whatever it is that track's going to make you feel, happy or whatever. And I think the one of the best reasons to use sampling is if you have a song that you want to evoke that emotion from. You go to that place and you can get that pretty quickly. The tricky thing, I don't know if it's one of your questions, but it probably is trying to build a track up on that and then take away the sample.
Right.
And so that you don't have the legal issues. And
that's a famous approach where you actually start with something like that.
It never works.
A lot of hip hoppers do that. You build a track and then it's like, okay, if you take it out, there's a hole there.
I can't remember his name, but there was a guy who did really well, probably in the late 90s, early 2000s. So the real heyday of sampling, when it had been used in pop music as opposed to hip hop, when it had transferred over. Where this guy's job, he built his little career around replacing samples with real stuff. So it was stuff with strings and horns and those kind of things, stuff that's not easy to do. So you go to him and for a price, he would then take a sample and recreate it. Yeah. And I did that on a couple of occasions. It's not very satisfying. It doesn't because
why do you think?
It's the glue together of something, isn't it? It's something like a Motown track or a James Brown tune or anything really is much more than the sum of its parts. It's that thing that it has. And yes, you can copy the horn lines and you can copy the string lines and you can use the same mics and you can even try and do it in a similar sized studio through a similar size. It's just never going to be the same. It's never going to have that. And one of the things is because most of the stuff that we sampled and that has been sampled is not perfect by any means. It's not. It's flawed. It has, it's got a bit of a boom in the bottom end. Maybe all the strings aren't perfectly played. If you go and take, say, a Willie Mitchell Al Green tune, and where he uses only maybe 4 or 6 violins, so it's quite a small sound, and you notice the tuning. You can hear the stuff. Or take some reggae horns where you can definitely hear that the intonation's not the most perfect thing,
but it's funky. It's
brilliant. It's what you want. It's the reason you go to that in the first place.
Yeah.
But it's hard enough to recreate something perfectly. It's really hard to recreate something imperfectly.
I see what you mean.
To recreate some bad tuning is I don't know how you can do that really. So you put all those elements together. And even then, it's to do with, for example, if you sample from vinyl, it's the sound of the needle on the record. That brings a part to it as well.
The actual material.
Yeah, the wow and flutter from a combination of things. It's pretty disappointing to replay samples.
I mean, you talked quite a bit about glue and about rooms and sources, but you also mentioned valves and specific pieces of equipment.
Yeah.
And I mean, you work in software, you work in hardware, you work in a hybrid way.
Yes.
And why? And why do you choose different things in different times?
There's some tracks that you would use a valve microphone for. Some tracks you wouldn't because it's not the right sound or it's not the right singer. And it's also you don't want too much of any one thing. You don't. I don't think many of us are in the business of actually trying to recreate something from 1967. I think we want to take what we like from that. We want to extract the goodness from the peach, but we don't want all the rest of it. We don't want to actually sound like 1967. I mean, I think Mark Ronson did a great job with Amy Winehouse to, when you listen to Back to Black, you kind of think you're listening to something that's got a kind of retro feel, but if you actually put on
a retro thing,
it will sound nothing like
Very
it
different,
at all. The bottom end's completely different, the top end's completely different. Somehow or other, he gets across. It's in the music, it's in the arrangements, it's in the aesthetic in terms of how he approaches recording it. That he's got that, but the actual sound is well. When was that record made? 2004. It's a 2004 record. It's not a 1964 record, but it recreates the spirit of that. And I think that's important to be able to work out what it is you're trying to do when you're sampling. Are you trying to just make a remake of some record from 1967, which you can do if you wanted to, but I'm not sure what the point is of that. Or are you just trying to borrow something from that period and add to the flavour? So that's
and would you say you choose some maybe equipment or processes or methods referentially to eras in modern record making? Do you do that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've got a few nice pieces of gear that I use that I've bought over the year. I've got a very nice Tube Tech stereo valve compressor. I've got some nice valve EQs. I've got a very nice Neumann from it's about 50 years old microphone, a valve mic.
So is it better when it's old? Being devil's advocate?
Kind of. I don't know. No, probably not much different. I shouldn't think the way that they're made like.
Robust.
Oh yeah, it's German technology works for 100 years. And
you think it's
1,000 years?
Has it lost maybe a little bit of top end? Is it warmer? Or is it what is it about it?
Yeah, it has. It's not. I mean, I've had it for 15 years, and it's not as bright as it was before.
That's a good thing?
You can get it back. You can get it back. It's not disastrous. To be honest, I would like it to be. I am actually considering getting a new capsule for it finally, but it's about 800 quid, or maybe a bit less than that. But it's a lot of money. But I am finally, because it's you can switch the capsule around and use the other side for a while, but there comes a point when you can't keep switching it around anymore. It's been switched about 5 times now, and just years of people spitting into it and all that stuff. Even if you use a pop shield,
spitting as in rapping or actual spitting.
yeah, both. Well, I mean, there's such a lot of good plug-in emulations now that you can, some of the Stephen Slate stuff is really good. Some of the Wave stuff is really good. In terms of capturing what a DBX 160X could do or what a Fairchild can do. Jack Joseph Puig's Fairchild his Waves emulation of it is fantastic. Chris Lord-Alge's emulation of 1176 is really, really good. It sounds okay. You could tell the difference, but it's so small that it completely outweighs. In fact, you can have 100 of them on your one track as opposed to one thing. Plus, it's 100 quid as opposed to 1,500 quid or about £2,000 or whatever. 1176. I don't know what 1176 goes for, but I'm sure it's 2,000 quid.
And some producers have said in interviews that, or sort of equipment reviews, that sometimes the difference between two different 1176s or two different pieces of the same hardware equipment can even be larger than the difference between a specific piece of equipment and its software emulation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely that's the case. Neumann 47s all sound very different. FX have got a fairly good selection, around about 7 of them, I think, maybe at the last count. And I know which one is the best one.
Good one.
I'm not telling anybody. When I hire it, I want it to be there. I don't want it to be out of someone else's studio for 6 months on a long-term hire. I want it to be able to use it.
So you ask for a specific serial number?
Oh yeah, no, of course. Yeah.
Awesome.
Because but that's not as hard as it sounds, because you end up using them all, and then one day you use one that sounds better than the one you used yesterday or the week before.
Yeah.
And you go, what number is that? I mean, and it's not to say that the other ones sound terrible, because they all sound fantastic, because it's a brilliant microphone. But there's certain, it has a certain thing to it. And that's kind of the fun of it, isn't it? The kind of the I think I've told you this story. I worked with Lamont Dozier, and I asked him. There was a channel on a Motown desk in Detroit that they put the bass through because it sounded great.
On a specific channel?
Yeah, and it's like this was the best channel. And so I when I finally was lucky enough to work with Lamont Dozier, I asked him, I said, is this true? Because I thought it might be a bit of an old wives' tale. And he went, no, man, it's not true. So he says, there was this one channel that we could never get the treble EQ to work on it, so we just stuck the bass through that.
So part of the Jamerson sound is not just no highs. It's actually there was no high EQ
because they had a treble cut and boost and a bass cut and boost in those days. They didn't have any EQ as
That's
such.
right.
It was like a hi-fi thing, and they just this pot just wouldn't ever work properly, so they just kept it switched off and they stuck the bass for it because the bass doesn't need treble.
So that's why Jamerson never changed the strings. There was no point.
Exactly. And I love the fact that that kind of actually and there's a kind of hip hop element to that, of like that kind of like taking making something work, the kind of DIY element to hip hop.
The punk, I find it as a punk thing.
It's a punk aesthetic, that kind of, because it's a street music, so it comes from people who probably don't have very much money and they have to make it work with whatever they've got, and you find a way. I remember hearing when Straight Outta Compton came out, which is what's that, probably 80, end of the 80s. I'd been making records for about 7 years at that point, and I kind of thought I knew how to make a record, and so I would listen to, I'd already by that time got to that horrible point that engineers get to, where you don't hear the music, you just hear what the mic on the
how
kick
it sounds.
drum.
That very analytical.
That's a SM57 on the snare. Oh yeah, that's a you're not hearing the song, you're hearing the constituent parts. And I'd got to that place, and I thought I knew how to make a record. And I heard Straight Outta Compton, and I also heard probably a year later or so Fear of a Black Planet.
Awesome record.
And I was like, I have no idea how you make this record. I have no concept at all, because it's the collage thing, and it's like the putting together of two samples created this sound that was so alien to my ears, but so amazingly brilliant. I was shocked. I mean, truly shocked. I mean, it sounds silly now, but I was like, how the hell did I do this? What the hell's going on? What is going on? And of course I investigated it and found out it was sampling, and proceeded accordingly to try and do that myself, as you would. And anyway, the point of my story is, I remember then, about 4 or 5 years later, listening to a lot of pop music, because by that point the sampling ethic had immediately transferred into popular music, and especially for the drums and stuff.
For hits, you mean?
No, actually the beat,
loops.
the breakbeat sort of element, the
funk and soul breaks.
that thing, yeah. I had a reason for some reason to go back and listen to Fear of the Black Planet and Straight Outta Compton, and they sounded like pop records then. They sounded completely like a pop record. Had no threat to it at all. Sounded exactly like, and I knew exactly how to make it. And it was just interesting how the whole culture had been completely kidnapped by pop music and taken all of it and stuck it straight into pop music and used in a completely in a sort of different way. Yeah. But the shock of the sound had gone completely. It's weird how that happens, because it doesn't happen. You can go back and listen to some jazz, for example, and it still can be quite shocking if you listen to Charlie Parker or Thelonious Monk or something like that. Even to this day, they are quite, wow, that's really, wow, oh my God. Yeah. And but hip hop just got assimilated so quickly, and I think that's been the case
with dance music, with electronic music.
I mean, how long was it between the first dubstep record that you heard and the first advert for a car on TV using a dubstep track?
I think about the same time it was in a break in a Britney song.
Yeah, it's about a year and a half probably.
It gets quicker,
from
right?
the first underground dubstep tune I heard to the Brit Skrillex doing Britney or any of that stuff, maybe a year and a half. It does get quicker because the people. It's interesting how this stuff has kind of cultural signifiers. Yeah. About being young and being hip and being cutting edge and all that stuff, and of course, if you're selling a BMW to young men of a certain age, say 25 years old, you want those signifiers to be there. You want it to be cutting edge and to be slightly threatening and all those things that you kind of match on.
You're using sound as symbol, almost, right?
And I think urban music generally and hip hop a lot has got used as a signifier. that assimilation of the hip hop culture into kind of I don't know, mainstream fashion and everything is fascinating. Really, I don't think any music has ever been as widespread as hip hop in terms of its impact.
I would say that records changed even in the frequencies they contain.
Yeah.
Like I thought that heavy metal in the era of new metal was actually a response to hip hop frequencies and.
Well, completely.
Beats,
I mean, Metallica particularly, you definitely can hear the way that Metallica do not sound like Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath. They sound much closer to Public Enemy or Run DMC or something like that than they do to, the bottom end's different, the top end's different, the amount of compression is different, everything's much more in your face, much more wall of sound in some ways, and in a way that a hip hop record can be so kind of upfront sounding.
Have you ever worked with a hip hop record or a hip hop artist? Or
no, I don't think I've ever done anything that you could officially call hip hop.
Unofficially?
No, I've done lots of R&B, lots of soul, lots of what you'd call black music, for want of a better term. But
any music involving sampling?
Oh, everything's involved in sampling. Yeah, I mean loads of sampling all the time. But yeah, I mean, I had a band back in the I've tried to avoid saying back in the day because I think it's a crap thing to say, but a long time
ago.
Yeah,
it is Hip Hop Time Machine, so it's all about time travel. Don't worry.
It's all trees around here, then and it's just about 1980, 81, and we were hearing Grandmaster Funk and stuff like that, and those kind of records, and we wanted to do some stuff like it. We didn't know how they were made, so we knew there was sampling was going on. So I had a TIAC 4-track at the time, and I had a little home studio. It was just before I'd ever really worked anywhere, and we would loop. So we get a drummer to play, and we'd play for like 4 minutes or so, and then we would get a tape loop, and we'd create a tape loop by a mic stand over here, and a mic stand over there, and a mic stand over here, and get the tape to go
a very long one
all the way around here.
Awesome.
So
that's DIY sampling, looping, isn't it?
Yeah, it was, and because actually, I mean, at 15 IPS, 2 seconds is 30 inches of tape. It's quite a lot. So if you want, like 2 bars, you've got quite a lot of tape to go. You've got to go basically around the whole room to get that 2 bars. And so we would take ages to get this. It would take a long time. But eventually, we were lucky enough to use a brilliant drummer called Bobby Irwin, who subsequently, sadly, passed away last year. But he was a brilliant time. He had a great time. And we would set up this thing and create a drum loop. And then we would re-record it. Because we only had the one tape machine, onto a cassette.
Wow!
Because that was all we had. We had the TIAC 4-track and a cassette, which would be, and so we recorded drum onto a cassette. So then a cassette would kind of give it this filtery sort of sound because the cassettes had a fairly limited frequency response. Even on a metal, TDK most expensive cassette, it still wasn't a proper sound. But it was great because it had this thing. So then we would loop the drummer and then put it onto the cassette and then re-record the cassette back onto the TIAC onto one track and then carry on. And that was the kind of and we'd get a great sound. It would be a thing, It's like people would listen to it. Oh, you get those drum sounds like that, and we're like,
we have our thing.
Yeah.
But it was totally your thing. I mean, that's great because I've called this thing a hip hop time machine because it's about sort of trying to travel back in time, and maybe for a generation of people who some of us didn't actually do it with tape. I mean, I use cassettes, but there are people maybe listening to this who never have really thought about sound beyond digital. Yeah. So an idea of a physical tape loop going around the room is a pretty awesome
the Beatles,
thing.
I mean, it wasn't I don't claim credit for the idea at all because it was the Beatles. I mean, George Martin was doing it with loads of stuff, and so. But the thing about that, all these techniques in those days was there was no YouTube. There was and no one liked to share. We got sharing. We have a sharing culture now of things. We didn't have a sharing culture. That's my secret. That's my thing. I don't tell anybody that because if I tell them that, I won't work again.
Well, thanks for sharing it here.
Yeah. So you wouldn't know. You'd know the Beatles used tape loops, but that's about as much as you know. So you'd have to work out that to get the tape, you'd have to put microphone stands or whatever, or maybe you're lucky enough to someone's seen a picture of something in some magazine or somewhere. But you'd have to work out how to do all this stuff yourself, and of course that would mean you'd do it wrong, or not wrong, but you would do it differently and get a slightly different result, which is great. The different result is what you want. Back to the other thing, why would you want to actually recreate something that someone has done to the point where it sounds identical? There's no point. And it's in the doing wrong. It's a kind of like Darwinian thing, isn't it? It's the kind of it's the deviation that
creates evolution.
Yeah. That kind of is the that goes forward, and the thing that doesn't deviate dies off eventually. And so the kind of hip hop. I always thought that hip hop is just a series of people getting it wrong,
and then evolves.
Yeah, but it's still sounding good, or not getting it wrong in terms of the record not having any value, but getting it wrong because they can't get it right because they don't have the technology to make it right.
Or
that
even
way.
the experience, right? Or
like the S900 was an 8-bit sampler, if I remember rightly. I'm pretty certain it's 8-bit, and maybe someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 8-bit with a fairly limited frequency response. Probably nothing above 12k, probably, and probably nothing below 100, probably, or not much anyway. But it's just that MIDI sort of sound is the sound of like
of a lot of hip hop.
Yeah, I mean from 1993 to whenever, probably the next version of Akai samplers, which would probably be the 5000 and 6000, the Akai,
or even the 2000s before that. But even the MPC 60s and the MPC range still had those converters, which we love so much because they actually crunch and they give you attitude on your drum sounds.
And you go online now and you buy samples that are 8-bit samples for that very purpose.
For that purpose. Well, Glenn, it's been fantastic having you on Hip Hop Time Machine, and I think that deviation into evolution is the bit I'm keeping from this because, I think we're all.
Trust me to get Ponzi.
That was awesome, man. Thank you so much.